guys, we're going to be reading an article called The Southern Colonies, a Basic Overview. And I would really like for you to be making your own annotations and highlights along the way rather than just copying what I'm doing. I'm just being here as a guide. I'd like you to do your own at this point in the year. All right. So if you find yourself just copying what I'm doing, that's not okay. And I do want you doing it on your own. All right. So the Southern colonies were the five southernmost colonies: Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. These colonies were founded mainly for profit or money. And you know that because think of Jamestown. The very first permanent colony ever in the New World was founded for money, and it was in Virginia, which is one of the southern colonies. So the southern colonies really, when you think of them, I mean, all the colonies wanted to make money, and they did. New England made it off lumber and fish and whaling, and middle colonies made it off grains, bread, mining iron even. But the southern colonies were totally focused completely on making money, not really caring as much about religion or anything like that. They really are focused on profit, money, and it's going to come from agriculture. Because remember, you've got the New England colonies up here, middle colonies. These are the southern colonies. Here's New England, here's middle, here's southern. As we go south, what happens to the climate? It gets warmer and warmer and warmer, and the soil gets richer and richer and richer. So people start to make a lot of money. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and start the second paragraph. In the southern colonies, the plantation system was important. A plantation is a huge piece of land that was often sectioned off into several different farms. A plantation owner, or they called him a planter, was in charge and had hundreds of people working for him, including hired help, that means people they paid, indentured servants, we already learned about them, remember? They're the ones who worked for free for several years as long as someone would pay for their journey to the New World. And then once their time for working was over, they were free and could go own their own farms. Artisans, you learned what those were. Artisans are people who are really good at a skill or trade, like wig making, candle making, shoe making, blacksmithing, things like that. And slaves. Plantations were like small cities because everything that a person needed could often be made or found on the plantation. Okay, you guys, when you think of a plantation, think of a giant mansion. It's a huge home, and their yard could be literally like thousands of acres. It could be like several football fields worth of lawn and grass and crops. And they hired all these people to work on the plantation. I'm going to show you a picture of one. Okay, this is a good picture of what a plantation could look like. Look at that, you guys. I know my hands are a little shaky because I always am a little shaky. That is one plantation. So you look at everything. They have the planter's house. Look at this. It's a mansion right by the water. And then there's the kitchen over here. They had the kitchen detached from the house because you had to cook over an open fire, and people were worried that if they lit a fire in a kitchen here, it would burn the whole house down. So they kept the kitchen separate. Look at the beautiful gardens here. And then the hospital is here in case somebody gets injured working in the fields. They can treat them and then get right back to work. Here's a workshop for artisans, people who might be making blacksmiths, like horseshoes for the horses or tools for the whatever they need. Slave quarters, these terrible little sheds, these shacks were where the slaves lived. Very uncomfortable, cold, too hot. It depended on the time of year. Here's the overseer's house. This is where the planter would hire someone to supervise the slaves. He would oversee the slaves. And you can see slaves working out here in this field. The overseer would live in that house and he would make sure people were working all the time. And he would go out and punish them if they weren't. So you can see plantations had everything they needed right there. They even have a place to let a ship come up and bring more supplies. Really, really, really just amazing. That's a southern plantation. Okay, so where were we? Oh, yeah. So the plantation system was important. A plantation is a huge piece of land that was often sectioned off into different farms because you guys, they could grow they could have an animal farm right here. They could be growing cotton out here. They could be growing tobacco out here. So they could section their farm off into different things. Look, there's some fruit trees there. So they could be selling apples. These could be peas, different, just totally different crops all on one plantation. So it could be sectioned off into several different farms. It's a lot of money. The planter was in charge and he had hundreds of people working for him. Hired help was paid, like the overseer. Indentured servants weren't paid, but they were freed after a few years. Artisans were craftspeople, people who knew how to make things, and slaves, of course, who were treated the worst and worked for free and had no choices. Plantations, now you see, were like small cities because everything a person needed could be made or found on the plantation because it was all about working. They didn't want people to have to leave. They wanted people to stay working in the fields. Okay, the soil in the southern colonies was fertile. Of course it was. Look at everything they can grow. And the growing season was long, which allowed for the growth of many types of cash crops. And of course, they have a long growing season. Look how far south they are. Or crops that were grown to sell. Some of the cash crops that were grown for sale were tobacco, rice, indigo, that's that bluish plant, cotton, sugar, and many others. So these were their cash crops. These planters, guys, these plantation owners were so wealthy, so rich. Okay, religious freedom was the norm. That means it was normal. Everybody had religious freedom. You know why? Because they cared more about money than religion. Unlike the New England colonies, people of different faiths worked and lived together in the southern colonies. Citizens were quite tolerant of other faiths, which is great. It's great. They lived together and respected one another. Because plantations, towns, and homes were so spread out, think of it. That's just one plantation. You can't have very many of them close together. They're huge. So because plantations, towns, and homes were so spread out, the community church was not the center of life the way it was in New England. People weren't concerned with the religious beliefs of their neighbors because they were too far away. Others were far away. Okay, so they were quite tolerant. That's very good. They were so spread out because they were huge. And again, please write your own annotations. Okay, government in the southern colonies was similar to the middle colonies because citizens practiced self-government. All men, of course, men who were eligible to vote, these were free white men who owned property, they were the people allowed to vote, elected representatives, just like the middle colonies. These representatives attended the colonial assembly, that's like a House of Representatives, to vote and help make laws for the colony. Each colony also had a governor who was appointed by the King of England and had the final say in all matters. So let's talk about that. Government in the southern was similar to the middle, yet self-government. All men, no women. You had to be free, you had to be white, and you had to be a man. So if you were a slave, you weren't free. If you were an indentured servant, you weren't free. You had to be white, and you had to be a man, and you had to own property. So if you're a poor white man who's free, you can't vote. You had to own property. Okay, so you had to have a little bit of money to be able to vote. And they elected representatives. They attended a colonial assembly, which was like a house of burgesses or a house of representatives, to vote and make laws. Each colony also had a governor who was appointed by the King of England. So this is what happens. Over in England, the king across the ocean would select a governor for the southern colonies, send that governor to Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, or Georgia, and that governor was the boss of the colony. And the king and the governor decided everything, how things were going to go in those colonies. They were bossy, and it came right from England. So you can see how the New England, Middle, and Southern colonies were very different from each other. All right, we'll study more about the Southern colonies soon.